if that's the case, you need to figure out what is your competitive advantage. What is the thing that you can impact that no one else can? And every one of the restaurants at the top of the list had done so by being unreasonable in pursuit of their food, their
Yep.
product. I decided that my impact would come through being unreasonable in pursuit of people. That's what gave birth to this strategy and the decision that we were going to be as creative and intentional in crafting the kinds of experiences that would make people feel seen as every other restaurant on that list was, simply in pursuit of what they were putting on the plates they were serving those people. Um, and that led to this long journey of my entire team working together to try to figure out, what does that mean? What does it mean to be unreasonable in our hospitality?
This is the Business of Advice podcast, where we help good advisors become great business owners. You know, I always look forward to every guest, but this is one that I've been looking forward to maybe more than any other guest that I've had on the show today. Our guest today, Will Guidara, is the author of a must-read book called Unreasonable Hospitality. You can't really see it on here, but I have probably 150 pages kind of dog tagged on there, just highlights from it. Give you a little background, was the former owner of the iconic New York restaurants, 11 Madison Park and Nomad, and was also a recipient of Wall Street Journal Magazine's Innovator Award. And I just say, as someone who grew up in the restaurant business and owns a few restaurants and loves the idea of hospitality, this will be a fun conversation for me. So Will, welcome to the Business of Advice.
Thank you so much, man. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation as well. I love talking to people that understand operations. I really do.
Yeah.
So
Well,
this is what I've been looking forward to.
Well, it's a few people. So one, my buddy John Rulin, when I had him on, and John and I have known each other for a long time, he's like, "Have you read this book yet?" And this was probably a year ago. And then Rory Vaden is a close friend too, and both
Yeah.
of them are like, "You got to read this book." And so I know everyone probably gets tired of me saying it at the beginning, like, "Go read this book," but like I've told everyone, the best book I've read in years, especially on the idea of hospitality. But maybe start there with the title of the book, Unreasonable Hospitality. Just I want to get into a little bit of how you got into the restaurant business too, but just let's start there with like explain the concepts, and then we'll probably dive into how you've applied it, on the business side of things too.
Yeah, so the word unreasonable, um, I think for some it can have negative connotations, and it was certainly a battle with the publisher to get them to embrace the name. But the reason why the book is called that, well, it's something. It's a way that I articulated an approach for years before I wrote the book. But listen, if you think about the most successful people out there, whether they are designers or athletes or producers or entrepreneurs, they are relentless in pursuit of bringing their vision to life, whether
Hmm.
it's in pursuit of becoming the best they can be at a sport or creating the best movie or designing the best product. They will do whatever it takes. Um, this book is me begging the world that we should be just as unreasonable in pursuit of how we make people feel as so many successful people already are in pursuit of the thing they're selling those people. Um, there's this behavioral psychologist I talk about in the book named Rory Sutherland, who says the opposite of a great idea needs to be a good idea.
Mm.
Um, for example, I couldn't say to you, "Hey, I have an amazing idea. Let's open a restaurant that serves good food." Right? That's not an amazing idea, because the opposite, there's no world where you'd open a restaurant that serves bad food, at least not with
Yep.
intention. Um, the opposite of unreasonable hospitality is reasonable hospitality. It's a perfectly fine way of doing business. I just believe that if you make the choice to be unreasonable in pursuit of hospitality, that becomes your greatest competitive advantage, full stop. And that any business, it doesn't matter what you do for a living, you can make the choice to be in the hospitality industry if you employ the ideas that I wrote about in the book.
It's good. And one of the things, I remember one of our advisors saying this, because we work with all these independent financial advisors, so they're not under a massive brand of, Morgan Stanley or et cetera. And he said, we can't always compete with them on all the value we provide, but we can always outcompete them in like the experience that we provide and how we make our clients feel. And that's why like any advisor should read this book, right? Just the principles are so applicable. But maybe back up, talk about how you got in the restaurant business. You were the started as the GM, became the owner of the #1 restaurant in the entire world, 11 Madison Park, that anyone who's a foodie, is probably very well aware of. So maybe just talk about that journey to get into this business, and then to, I guess, build the #1 restaurant in the entire world, which, congrats, pretty cool accomplishment.
I grew up in restaurants. My dad was a restaurateur. And I mean, I talk about my dad constantly.
Yeah.
Because, well, he is my mentor, my dad, obviously, and my best friend. And growing up, he was my hero. And my mother was a quadriplegic when I was a kid. She got brain cancer and then ultimately became a quadriplegic. And my dad, I mean, anyone out there who has ever known someone who works in the restaurant business understands what restaurant hours means. And he would work restaurant hours and take care of her, which means getting her out of bed, getting her ready for the day, showering her, dressing her. He would do the same thing in return on his, or in reverse when he got home, and still was a remarkable father to me. And so I was just in awe of him growing up. He was a superhero to me. And so it honestly wouldn't have mattered what he did. That's the thing that I would have.
You were doing that.
But it just so happened that he did the thing that I fell in love with. Because restaurants, okay, in addition to the fact that every single day is different, right? You go in, you can spend a day focused on leadership or financial management or design or team building or whatever other parts of the creative process that present themselves. Every day is different. And there's this thing when you walk into a dining room, you have the chance to bear witness to all of life's experiences happening simultaneously under one roof. And I think there's something so energizing for me about that. Not to mention the fact that I derive the most pleasure out of bestowing graciousness upon others, and restaurants are just one of the most beautiful places to do that. And so I followed in my dad's footsteps. He was an amazing mentor to me. He really guided my path over the course of my life. I was about to say encouraging me. It wasn't actually encouragement in the beginning. It was, he would tell me exactly what I had to do, and I did whatever he told me to do for a pretty big chunk of my career.
Yeah.
And he showed me the power of learning the business from the ground up. And so I've done literally everything you can do in the restaurant business, from the kitchen to the dining room to the back office and everything in between. And ultimately, when I graduated Cornell, I went to the hotel school there. I set my sights on working for Danny Meyer because he was just the best.
Yeah.
I knew I never wanted to be a chef. I love food, but I always wanted to be the guy in the dining room having the party, hosting the party, serving people. And Danny was, and in many ways still is, like there aren't that many celebrity restaurateurs, right? People that you can look up to from afar and want to one day be. And Danny was that for me. And I worked for him for years until I ultimately found myself at 11 Madison Park, working for him before I bought the restaurant from him.
So I want to talk about that a little. I think it's fascinating. Maybe set the scene when you stepped into 11 Madison Park, because you didn't own it right away. You ended up buying it later on. But when you stepped in there, what was the state of the restaurant? Ask this question in a few ways. Like, maybe what was the state of the restaurant, the staff, and then what were the opportunities you saw to improve that, and then how'd you go about doing that, right? How'd you change maybe the culture that was already established there?
So Danny Meyer is famous for restaurants like Union Square Cafe and Gramercy Tavern. Perhaps he's most famous now for Shake Shack.
Yep.
But he had the best restaurants in New York. 11 Madison Park was kind of the redheaded stepchild of the group. It was a middling brasserie. It was a restaurant that had not yet lived up to its potential. The food was delicious, but not significant in the culinary landscape. The service was friendly, but not very precise. But our dining room, man, if you've never seen a picture of the dining room at 11 Medicine Park, look it up. It is truly one of the most beautiful out there. And I was brought in as a part of the team charged with elevating the experience to live up to the room itself. Um, I mean, what was the picture when I got there? Well, that change had started before I got there. Um, and what it had led to was two opposing factions within the restaurant. There were the people that had been there for a long time who did not want their cheese moved. And there were all the new people that had joined the team that were veterans at the highest level of fine dining who wanted to move that cheese as quickly as humanly possible. And it resulted in a lot of tension and very little empathy. And so my first role / goal in being there was to, well, understand the picture, understand what I was walking into. I think that so many people, when they enter an organization, they feel they need to prove their worth by acting quickly.
Yep.
I think the best way to show your confidence and then prove your worth is by doing nothing at all until you understand what's happening enough that the things you do are the right things to do. And so in the beginning, I just got to know everyone as best I could, to hear everyone's version of the truth and understand those two factions such that I can ultimately begin the process of bringing them together, evolving change at a pace slower than what some would have liked and faster than what the others would have liked, but ultimately finding a pace that was correct for the organization as a whole.
Yep.
And to anyone listening, if you're hearing the chirps of little children in the background, I appeal to you to be empathetic to my role as a dad as well as a guest on this podcast.
That's what happens when you have 1 and 3-year-olds.
Yeah. Which, by the way, I mean, there are a few sounds that bring me more joy. Then after that, it was creating structure. You think about, like, you can't build a taller building unless you first stop and solidify the foundation of that building. And for me, that was structure, most focused on communication. We spent a long time really asserting to the team as a whole that feedback was going to be a very big part of our culture, not just praise when people did things well, but constructive criticism when they didn't. Asserting this idea that praise is affirmation, but criticism is investment. We were going to be reaching for the stars, and the only way to get there was for the entire team to embrace the responsibility of investing in one another, and for everyone to also understand that receiving criticism is the same thing as receiving a gift, so long as it comes thoughtfully from someone who's invested in your growth. We set up a really strong rhythm of meetings. I'm a very, very big evangelist of a daily huddle.
Yeah.
In the restaurant business, we call that pre-meal, but not just having it for the sake of having it, but really treating it like a grave responsibility and opportunity that a leader has every day to actually step up every day and lead, to talk not just about the what, but the how and the why, to invest in making their people better people, not just better at their jobs. I believe a daily huddle, when done well, is the thing that brings the people you work with and turns them from a collection of individuals into a trusting team, which is a requirement if you want to unlock a collective creativity and capacity.
I was actually blown. Let me ask you a little bit about communication. It was the one of the things that I took away is like the amount and level and detail of communication that you had. And I think what struck me about that is like to create this great experience where everyone is on the same page, right? That was, you use that daily huddle to really do that. it struck me like if you're willing to do that in the restaurant industry, like think of other businesses and how they would apply that. And then you said something earlier. It was another thing I highlighted in the book is just, you know, whether you call it criticism or giving people, you know, very constructive feedback on how they can improve. It's like, man, a lot of people are afraid to do that, but I don't know exactly how you worded it, and I don't have time to flip and find it in there, but you basically said, like, if you really care about someone and want them to be the best, like, you should view that as a huge gift to them, which I know you said that a little bit. So just any thoughts on how, if a business owner is not doing that, right? One of the things I've seen is a lot of times they'll struggle to, how do we go from not communicating much, which maybe they weren't communicating a lot at the restaurant before you took over, to we're going to implement this and we're going to be consistent with it. Just any wisdom on how to do that?
Yes. So 3 things. I like using the word criticism as opposed to thoughtful feedback.
Yeah.
And I do it because I want to call a spade a spade. I want to normalize that criticism as a good thing and stop sugarcoating it by calling it something that it's not.
It's okay to tell someone they suck, right?
It's okay to credit. Well, no, it's not okay to tell them they suck.
Yes.
But it's okay to address a behavior.
Yep.
I always there, and hold on, I'm going to double back to that because I actually read something that I loved that I'm going to share. But criticism is essential. If you are someone that wants to grow and no one is criticizing you when you're doing something incorrectly, you're not going to know to change that behavior, and you're not going to ever have a chance to become the best version of yourself you can possibly be. Think of it like an athlete. If Michael Phelps was not doing one of those strokes correctly and did not have a coach to tell him why he was doing it incorrectly, he never would have gone on to win those gold medals.
That's good.
But so it needs to be done. It needs to be done consistently. It needs to be received well, because also if you get defensive when other people criticize you, guess what they're going to stop doing? Stop investing in you, and you are going to stop growing. But there are rules to give criticism thoughtfully. Criticize in private, not in public. The moment you do it in public, walls of shame go up. They're not going to receive your message. Criticize without emotion. If you bring emotion into it, the conversation becomes emotional. It's not meant to be emotional. It's meant to be pragmatic. Criticize consistently. And then criticize the behavior, not the person. I'm not saying you suck. I'm just saying the way you are doing this one thing, that kind of sucks. And obviously I wouldn't use that word, but
yeah,
I'm looking at this school for my 3-year-old, and I was reading their guidebook just this morning, and they articulated what I just said, but in a really beautiful way. We start by assuming the best in each child, knowing that they are not their behavior, but sometimes behavior needs to be addressed and redirected. And it's saying the same thing I always say, but I think it's articulated in quite a beautiful way.
Yeah, that's really good.
But I didn't answer the question you asked me. The question you asked me is, what advice do I have for someone who's not doing this and wants to start doing it? What I just said is how to start doing it when you do, but that's not how to start doing it. I think if you're going to change your approach within a culture, one of the most hospitable things you can do with the team is set expectation that a change is coming, such that people aren't surprised when it does. I always tell people, if they don't have a culture where feedback has been normalized, don't just start automatically, or randomly rather, giving feedback, praising, criticism all the time. Have a meeting with your team. Talk about it for a couple weeks in your daily huddle. Say, we are going to be more focused on consistently providing feedback, and this is why. Both of those are necessary. Not just setting expectations for the what, but backing it up with the why. Then people are prepared for what's about to start, and they understand that it's rooted in beautiful intention. But anytime you're about to change anything, and I didn't say this explicitly in the book, I've gotten better at articulating it since I've been on the road answering questions after I give talks. That with any of the things I talk about in the book, if you're making the choice to implement them into your company, have a meeting with your entire team. Talk about what you're going to do. Express the intention, why you're choosing to do that. get everyone on board, and then start doing it.
That's great. Appreciate the feedback. And even though that first part didn't answer that question, there was incredible feedback on how to criticize, correctly too. I want to ask a question. Like, I get some version of this question all the time. We started the business 19 years ago with three of us, have 1,000 employees today. People always ask, like, did you ever envision it would look like this? And the reality that I tell people all the time is, no, I didn't. But along the way, I've been able to see what it could become. So I'll ask that in a way, like when you stepped into 11 Madison Park, like, did you set a goal right away to say, we're going to become the #1 restaurant in the world? Not a real easy feat to accomplish. Or was that something like as you started seeing some of this growth and improvement, like you started to see what was possible for the restaurant?
My dad gave me this paperweight when I was a kid. I have it on my desk, not the one I'm sitting at, the other one, to this day, because it's become such an important part of how I approach goal setting. It said, what would you attempt to do if you knew you could not fail?
Mm.
When I first got to that restaurant, the goal was not to be #1 in the world. The goal was to be a 4-star restaurant in New York City, of which there were 6, and 6 of tens
Hundreds.
of thousands.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, the goal was audacious from the start. I love setting audacious goals, being unbelievably disciplined in your pursuit of those goals. And then once you've achieved them, giving yourself the grace to celebrate for a measure of time before you set a new, even more audacious goal. And so, no, #1 in the world. I mean, that list wasn't even on my radar at that time. But once we had achieved 4 stars, we needed something more or something new
Yeah.
to look towards.
I wasn't going to ask this, but you just said something that made me think of something that actually we kind of got away from a little bit and recalibrated and realized that we'd gotten away from it. But, as you're growing and having all this success, one of the things that jumped out in the book is when you would hit those goals, and you just said it, like you would throw some epic celebrations. Would you talk about just like how important like a celebration is when you achieve that goal? But then maybe the second question I'll ask there is, because you just said it, how did you then refocus the team on like, awesome celebration, proud of you, we're going to have a blast. Okay, what's next? And keep them moving forward there.
By the way, I think that's the appropriate response, not just to success, but to failure. In either case, you need to give yourself the grace and the time to celebrate, or the grace and the space to fully feel the weight of your disappointment. For a measure of time only. And then get back up and refocus on the road ahead. And by the way, I think it's easier to get understanding from a group around that philosophy when you're talking about it as it pertains to both success and failure. In the same way that I will not stick your nose in it endlessly when we fail, I will also not just allow us to sit on our laurels endlessly when we succeed. We are in a journey. And every success and failure is simply a stop along the way.
That's really good. One of the things, I know we've talked about it, but I probably should just pause and have you share a little bit of like, what were some of the experiences that you created for the customers when they would come in there, right? So the whole book, and not the whole book, the book talks about a million different things, but like I think the basis of it is, how did we create this hospitality or environment that just blew people's minds when they were in there? I'd probably be remiss not to have you share some of those, but I'll ask it maybe in the sense of like, as you think about all the things that you did for your customers, is there one that is maybe your favorite that kind of exemplifies what you meant with your team with Unreasonable Hospitality?
Well, so I think what's important to first acknowledge is, in the beginning, for quite a long time, Unreasonable Hospitality was not the focus. Excellence was the focus. That's how we got 4 stars. We were maniacally focused on our pursuit of excellence with the product itself. Um, it's when we began our journey to become number one that Unreasonable Hospitality came into view, because the first year we were on that list, we came in last place. um, by the way, I look back on that with such gratitude, because I don't think we ever would have become number one were it not for the sense of disappointment or embarrassment or shame that I felt coming in last place the first year.
That's interesting. If you would have finished 10th or 12th or
Or
something, it would have
30th
been like,
or
hey,
40th
we're
even.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Now, the recognition that followed because listen, whenever you set your sight on doing something audacious, you need to first start by studying those who have accomplished it before you, learn lessons from them, take those lessons, make them your own. And I really studied the restaurants. A couple things became clear. First, okay, it's absurd to say that one restaurant is the best restaurant in the world. There's too many restaurants. It's too subjective. It's not like a race, right?
Yeah.
Someone is clearly faster than the other person. When you achieve the top spot on that list, what it actually means is that you are the restaurant having the greatest impact on the world of restaurants at that point in time. And if that's the case, you need to figure out what is your competitive advantage. What is the thing that you can impact that no one else can? And every one of the restaurants that is top of the list had done so by being unreasonable in pursuit of their food, their product. I decided that my impact would come through being unreasonable in pursuit of people. That's what gave birth to this strategy and the decision that we were going to be as creative and intentional in crafting the kinds of experiences that would make people feel seen as every other restaurant on that list was, simply in pursuit of what they were putting on the plates they were serving those people. And that led to this long journey of my entire team working together to try to figure out, what does that mean? What does it mean to be unreasonable in our hospitality? And it looked like a bunch of different things, but I believe what you're getting at is the Dreamweaver program, where we added a position to the team. It was a person on the floor with us every night, simply there to help bring people's ideas to life. And so we taught, inspired, and encouraged our team to be present at the tables, to not take themselves too seriously, and in doing so, to identify one-size-fits-one gestures to deliver to the people we were serving. Mm-hmm. And then the Dreamweavers were there to bring ideas to life. Mm-hmm. And it looked like a ton of different things. It could have been little things like a guest told our reservationist when we confirmed their reservation, he was like, heads up, I'm taking my dad there, and it's a fancy restaurant. My dad's more of like a Budweiser steak and potatoes guy. So like, if he says anything, like, I don't want to feel embarrassed, just know that that's what you're serving. And we had these fancy champagne carts. Like, so there was like a bucket of ice with champagne on wheels that we'd push up to the table so you could like just pick your champagne right in front of you. That night, the Dreamweavers went to every bodega in the neighborhood and bought every available type of bottled Budweiser. So we turned our champagne cart to a Bud cart for him.
That's awesome.
We did other things. One night there was a couple, this is one of my favorites, dining with us. They'd just gotten married at City Hall. They actually did have a big wedding planned, but some amount of irreparable drama broke out between the families. They were over it. This was now their wedding night. The server, mind you, the hourly employee on her own, which is a testament to aligning your entire team on your vision and reinforcing it every single day in your daily huddle, committed herself to figuring out over the course of their meal what their wedding song would have been. Mm-hmm. And we slowed down their meal just enough that they were some of the last people in the room, which meant most of my team was no longer on the clock. Instead, they were in our private dining room having a staff party that turned into those people's wedding reception. When they were done with their meal, we walked them into the room on cue, put on their wedding song. We'd given them the gift of their first dance. But we did countless things just like this every single night for years. And why I wrote the book and why I'm going around and doing talks, and why I spend time on podcasts with people like you is, well, I believe this strategic approach is a win-win-win. It's great for the customers. Obviously, we're in a cultural season where people are not accustomed to people going above and beyond for them anymore, which is sad, but it also presents a rare and beautiful opportunity, because when someone does do that for you, it feels freaking great.
Mm-hmm.
It's great for the bottom line because, yeah, we spent money on this stuff. We hired people onto the team, bought bottles of Budweiser and all sorts of other ridiculous random stuff. Every dollar I ever spent on Unreasonable Hospitality is far more impactful than any dollar I ever spent on traditional marketing, because you give people stories like that to tell. What do you think they're going to do? Mm-hmm. They're going to tell them endlessly, and they will do your marketing on your behalf much better than you'd ever be able to do it yourself. And the third one, I think, was the most valuable win. It was just awesome for our team, because we'd taken salespeople and turned them into product designers. They were no longer just serving plates of food that someone else created. They were imbuing the experience with their own creativity. And I mean, I don't know about you, I have yet to meet a single individual that won't give more of themselves to help something succeed than once they feel they've had a genuine hand in determining what that thing is.
That's cool. I think one of the things that struck me, knowing the restaurant business, and obviously 11 Medicine Park had a little higher ticket price than the ones I own, but like your lifetime value of a client is good. But if I were to compare it, no offense, to the lifetime value of an advisor with us, or honestly our advisors' clients, I mean, the lifetime value of one of their clients may be tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue. And you were willing a lot of times to spend, I mean, looking at some of the things, they had to cost more than the people's meal they had, paid for that night. But like just understanding like that value that it was going to bring and what the people were going to talk about, the experience it creates them coming back to the restaurant. Like if you're willing to do that in a restaurant, like where these businesses have this high lifetime value, like they should really be thinking about it, like how do we implement this in a massive way across our organization?
Yeah, I don't really think you can afford not to.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, we maybe one time we spent more money on something than they gave us that night. It wasn't ever like that. I mean, I have this rule I call the 95-5 rule, which is manage your money like a maniac 95% of the time, such that you can earn the right to spend 5% of it foolishly. Putting foolishly in air quotes, because it's not actually foolish at all. That's some of the greatest money you can spend. And a lot of businesses struggle with that spending because it doesn't have clearly defined, easy to calculate ROI, but that doesn't mean there's no return. In fact, in spite of the fact that it's impossible to measure, I believe it's so vast, it's almost incalculable. And yeah, there's plenty of other businesses that have a lot more money coming in from an individual that make the choice to do none of this stuff. And here's the deal. I don't care how good your product is. I don't care how strong your brand is. Eventually someone's going to come around and they're going to build a better product or create a stronger brand. And that's not a subjective statement. History has proven that will happen 100% of the time. It's just a simple matter of how long it will take. The greatest competitive advantage you actually can assert is through investing in your relationships.
That's good. I think one of the things that struck me too, we talked about some of the bigger prices or that, but like it is how much, and this, maybe you can speak to this a little, this is where I was going with the question of like how you really got everyone bought in, how you trained it early on for them to really identify and look for this. But like one of the examples I remember is the couple that had been to New York and ate like everything, ate at all the great restaurants. And they're like, the only thing we didn't have was like, a street vendor hot dog or something. And you ran out and got them hot dogs at the end of the dinner. So it can be, and that's what I tell people a lot of times. It's more about, it's less about how much you spend. It's more about how personal you make it, right? And something like that, I don't know, maybe they're $10 hot dogs now or something, but like had this huge impact on them. How did you go about like training and developing that within your team? Like, here's what to listen for, here's what to look for, and then here's how we execute it.
Well, yes, it's not the cost of the gesture that matters. It's thoughtfulness that matters.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully, as a proud New Yorker, I just want to make sure the world doesn't think inflation's gotten away from us to the point that hot dogs are now $10.
Okay.
Well, a couple things. We had a culture of upward mobility. People started at the bottom and worked their way up regardless of experience. The idea being that culture can't be taught, it can only be caught, and giving people a season or two at the very least to fully understand what we were striving to embody would make the world of difference when it came time for them to speak on our behalf. And so people got to just kind of absorb it and digest it for a while, right? And learn from their peers before they were on the front line. But I believe in empowering people to the max once you've set them up for success to own that empowerment. And so, yeah, if you were new on the front, it was kind of just understood that you didn't just run with an idea until you'd gotten sign off. But once we were all on both sides of the relationship comfortable that we were aligned on what right looked like, then it was off to the races, recognizing, by the way, that creating a culture where feedback is normalized is the best way to supercharge that. Whether it's through publicly praising people who have done things well, which shows everyone else on the team what right looks like, or privately criticizing an action or behavior where they fell short and seizing on it as an opportunity to teach them how you would have done it differently and how they should think about it differently the next time.
That's good. You talked about, staffing and them being able to kind of absorb and see it for a while before they hit, let's say the front line. One of the questions I was going to ask you is you were hiring staffing and bringing them in. Did you find a way to identify people who this concept of unreasonable hospitality was like a trait or skill that they already almost had? Or was it something where you didn't necessarily look for it, you were going to coach and develop it, a mix of the two? Maybe what I'm asking is, if you were trying to hire for it, was there a way that you found to figure out if those people had that?
When I was coming up, a lot of people would say that you hire for hospitality and you train for excellence, almost saying that people are either hospitable or they're not. I don't agree with that. I think everyone has hospitality in them. Sometimes it just needs to be drawn out of them. Whether through them receiving it and recognizing how good it feels to receive, or through working alongside them and coaching them to the point where they give it and they very quickly get addicted to that beautiful feeling that comes when you see the look on someone else's face when they receive a gift you're responsible for giving them. What I look for are three things when I'm hiring someone. I try to interrogate the list of what experience or education or credentials are required. Because I think every time you add a new prerequisite to the list, you're filtering out someone that could have been amazing on your team. And then once I'm sitting down with them, clearly they've checked whatever those boxes are. And then my role is just to get to know them and seek out three things. Do I think they have integrity? Do I think they have a good work ethic? And do I think that they will get along with the people who already work for me? If they check all three of those boxes, 9 times out of 10, you can coach them to greatness. I say 9 times out of 10 because I don't care. I'm pretty good at that. I know we all have our strengths. One of mine is that I'm good at seeing the person and identifying whether they're the right person for my team. I know I'm better at that than some people. And still, I make mistakes.
Yep.
And it's an inevitability. So if you're someone out there and you're frustrated that you've made the mistake and hired the wrong person, no matter how good you are at this, you will make that mistake. And so don't beat yourself up. It's just a part of the game.
Yep. That's good. I love that feedback. Okay, I want to ask you two questions before we jump into kind of these lightning round real quick that aren't necessarily designed around the experience or hospitality. It's more one of the things I took from your book is your love of operations, right? An ability to operate things at a high level. So there were two things I wanted to ask you about. You talked about that 95-5 earlier on how to manage, but you had this other comment, and I think you talked about it in the concept of as you were going through 2020 and COVID and, all the nightmares of that. But it was like, I think the quote was raindrops make oceans. And you were talking, we have the same, we talk about all the time about dripping nickels, right? And it was this idea of like, we started paying attention to like, where are we spending money? How can we, cut things that we don't necessarily notice it, but that just any philosophy around how a business owner should go about approaching that of like managing their expenses and really being thoughtful about how to look at that.
Yeah, so the season where I really learned this firsthand was not COVID. It was actually the Great Recession, like '09,
Oh yeah.
'09, 10 with the Lehman crash and all that stuff. Um, I think when we are struggling financially, right, there's a couple things we all try to do. We try to come up with creative ways to build the top line, and we try to find significant ways to cut expenses. And appropriately, the first pass when we're looking at expenses is, are there any big ticket items we can cut, right? We can find the greatest lever, the thing that we can exert the least amount of pressure that will have the greatest impact. Okay, great, do that. And okay, if you're lucky, you can find one of those or two of those that make the biggest dent. And if you do, don't not also, I'm not sure how my double negatives are
Yep.
doing it, but seek out the little things. Or if you can't find one of those big ticket things, don't lose all hope and instead pivot to looking for the little things because you make enough small changes. Raindrops do make oceans. The cumulative impact of those changes can be extraordinarily impactful. The second half of that is, well, be disciplined about holding on to all those little changes when the going gets good again, because you always want to take something positive out of negative times. And if you do it in the right way, you emerge from a season of adversity more profitable than when you went into it because you're maintaining the same discipline and holding on to the same controls you implemented when times were a bit more difficult.
It's so fascinating. I saw, COVID for financial advisors, so many of them used to meeting people face to face. Early, it looked like it was going to be, a disaster. It ended up like I look at all our advisors and their business is so much stronger today because of some of the smart changes they made during that time, And I think that's a great thing. It's like now as times are good, make sure that you don't start abandoning some of those things that really led to that. Okay, second, like operation.
With the caveat, though, with the caveat that you can't stop investing in relationships because you grow accustomed to a certain profit percentage.
Yep, that's good.
If you grow too attached to a certain percent, that may work for you in the short term, but in the long term, you might suffer if you are under investing in the relationships that actually enabled you to grab that percentage in the first place.
Yep, that's good. Okay, second operational question I want to ask you because a lot of our advisors are now doing this. So you started with 11 Madison Park, own that. You opened Nomad in New York City, kind of right down the road, it sounded like. That ended up with restaurants in LA, Las Vegas. How did you, and this is what I'm seeing with a lot of our advisors, they're opening multiple offices, maybe multiple cities, multiple states now. How did you go about scaling that culture across all of those and making sure that there was consistency when you couldn't necessarily be in that restaurant every single day?
Two parts. With the admission that I did it imperfectly. We did it thoughtfully and well, and it was imperfect. The first is the power of language. If you have not, as a leader, recognized the importance and the power of language and forced yourself to articulate succinctly your core values, created your own isms, the kind of things that will make other people who work with other companies think that yours is a cult.
Mm-hmm.
You're leaving opportunity on the table. You need to have language that compels bigger and bigger groups of people in more and more places to feel a connection to what your non-negotiables are, what you believe is important. And then I would not grow into a new place unless I had someone on my team who had been with me for a while that was ready to go run that
That's
place
great.
with me.
Yep.
I think that culture is like a sourdough starter. You need a little bit from one place in order to spread the culture in the new place.
That's good. It's funny you say that. Our advisor, who I've seen do it about the best, that's what he does. It's someone who's been with him for a while will say like, "Yeah, I'll move to Dallas, and open that office and get it off the ground." So that's great feedback. Okay, that's because I know we got a hard stop. Let's jump into these lightning round questions. Short, can be short, quick questions that I ask at the end of this every time. So going back, we talked about COVID, but I just like to use that now as a point. Is there a lesson you've learned since COVID that was maybe either new or reinforced something that you'd always believed that is something like now you're going to carry forward for the rest of your life?
I think COVID for me resulted in the restoration of normal. Hear me out.
Okay.
Going into COVID, life was so frenetic and so busy and filled with so many highs that the smaller, more normal moments were ones that I no longer had the capacity to appreciate. Ice cream with my
Yeah.
wife, watching a movie with a friend. COVID made those moments so much more rare that when we had them, we celebrated them. And that is something I am dead set on holding on to.
That's great. Yeah, that's an incredible lesson. Okay, second question. What is one thing, the one thing that you did to graduate you from being a good leader to a great leader?
Learning that when it comes to excellence, the goal is perfection. When it comes to hospitality, the goal is perfect imperfection. And that when you empower those around you, you need to embrace that it will come with some mistakes, but the value of them feeling empowered far outweighs the damaging impact of a few mistakes along the way.
That's great. Yep, great advice for any leader. Oh, okay, third question. Is there something you're doing this year to drive your own personal growth and development that you're excited about?
I'm trying to bring the same discipline I bring to so many different parts of my life just to like the most mundane parts of self-care. And this is going to sound so ridiculous, but I'm flossing every day, which may to some feel like this absurd thing that I wasn't always doing. That I bought an electric toothbrush. I do my push-ups every day. Like I'm just trying to create more practices that are centered around serving myself to match the discipline I've brought to creating practices rooted around serving others.
Yeah, that's good. It shocks me as someone who reading your book that you don't floss every day prior to that. So I'm glad you're doing
No,
that now.
like there's so many things that I've always done, but like the little things for
Yeah,
myself have always been the things that we all only have so much bandwidth.
yeah.
And I'm just reprioritizing some little things like that.
Okay, fourth question, great one. Is there what is the one book that you have recommended? Can't be your own, to other entrepreneurs, leaders, business owners the most?
I mean, sheer numbers, it's the 1 Minute Manager because I've been recommending that for the
Yep.
past 20 years. Um, More recently, I mean, I love pretty much anything that Don Miller writes.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's pretty extraordinary. I mean, Story Brand is awesome, and I think actually like that book similarly influences so many different parts of life. Just this narrative that think of life or any different facet of your life like a story, and then determine who the hero is. I mean, those are the two that jump to mind.
Those are great. Okay, final question. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
From my dad, no surprise.
Yep.
Um, Life is filled with impossible decisions and challenging moments at varying crossroads. And whenever you find yourself in one of those scenarios, just ask yourself what right looks like and do that. Understanding that sometimes doing what's right will feel much worse for you in the moment, but it will always be the thing that's best for you in the end. And if you make the decision now that you will always do what right looks like, you actually never have to make another challenging decision again.
That's great. And people should, in the book, there's so much wisdom that you can tell that you gleaned from your dad over the years. So I know I've said it a few times. People need to go pick up the book. It's literally one of the best books I've read in a long, long time. So especially with what I say our business does, what so many of the people that listen to this do, right? It's all things being equal. I believe the business that provides the best experience is always going to win. And this is a cheat code on how to do that, basically. So, Will, I appreciate the time. Anyone who listens who wants to follow kind of along on your journey and what you're doing, what's the best way for them to follow you?
I think the two best ways are, so I loved writing the book. I didn't want to stop writing. And so every other week I have a newsletter that goes out called Pre-Meal, and it's basically my virtual daily huddle, which you can sign up by going to unreasonablehospitality.com and just throw your email in there. Or on Instagram at Guidara. I share a lot of stories from others about unreasonable hospitality out in the world, because I think hearing these stories inspires and encourages us to find opportunities of our own.
I agree. And hopefully people are inspired by this. As I tell everyone, like, go share this one, right? Because this is, especially for the advisors that listen, like, this is a big game changer for your business. So, Will, I appreciate the time. I'm sure this, for our advisors, will probably not be the last time they hear or see you. So looking forward to trying to do some things in the future, but appreciate the time today.
Thank you, buddy.